Good evening, or afternoon, or whatever you want to call it, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I've decided to do a second, or is it? No, it's actually my third take now. As far as this Liverpool incident is concerned, the one where a man decided to plough through a crowd of people, injuring what claims to be almost 50, including 4 children. Now, the way I look at this is no matter what kind of person has done this, whether it's the usual suspects, whether it's a Hindu, whether it's a black, whether it's a white female, he male, she male, or whatever other type of fucking male, the way I look at this, any person that can go out of their way to try and butcher dozens of people with a car, including kids, I'm sorry, you're scum, period. There isn't any shot you can tell me otherwise, not even a free kick. The law applies equally, or it should do, to everyone. If you go out of your way to try and butcher dozens of people with a car, you are nothing. You are subhuman filth, period. Much like Axel Radaku Banana. Now, there are some people who are coming out and saying that this driver was antagonised, but I can't confirm this, as I don't know the full context of it. Who said this was a job for Matthew the Roadblock? Shut up, you. No, I wouldn't have been able to block that shit, no matter how big I am. But the jokes aside, this is a very serious thing, because the way I look at it, last year, obviously we had Radaku Banana go out of his way to try and slaughter children at a dance class. And we were told by the police and Keir the traitor Starmer that we should not be speculating. They kept on trying to say that it was a Welsh choir boy, when this scumbag was about as holy as the spawn of Satan. And far be it from me to start being holy on thou, because I'm not Christian, let me tell you. I don't know if I ever will be, quite frankly. But what I will say is that I understand, as said, the Judeo-Christian heritage of this country. But I'm not here to talk about the heritage, I'm here to talk about the people that were nearly butchered. But going back to the original point I made when they tried to cover up Southport, Keir the traitor Starmer was doing everything he could. He even had meetings with, I believe, the school, if I'm not much mistaken, about this spawn of Satan, if you will. There were people who had already figured out that this person was from that religion of peace, even though they're as peaceful as an elephant on a minefield. But the mainstream media, they kept on doing everything they could to hide the truth from us, to try and portray him as a Welsh choir boy, even though this man, this scum, produced enough ricin that he could kill 10,500 people. But they still had the audacity to say, this is not a terrorism incident. The counter-terrorist police said that this has nothing to do with a terrorist act. I mean, what's next? An act of shoplifting isn't classed as theft? Well, no, they'd have to get underneath it first and start lifting. Anyway, the point is, you can't exactly say that someone who went out of their way to attack children wasn't doing this as an act of terror. I'm sorry, but that's just not going to happen. Under those same guidelines and the same reasoning, it also stands to reason why you can't say that this attack on those Liverpool people, those scousers, if you want to call them that, this was a terror attack. Simple as that. I mean, have you known one attack on children that wasn't a singular case being nothing of an act of terrorism? I haven't. So it stands to reason why, unlike our spineless counter-terrorist police and our lamestream media, I'm going to call it what it fucking is. A terrorist attack. And yes, I better get ready to barricade the doors, because Keir the traitor Starmer's stormtroopers will probably be giving me a visit for that one, quite frankly. Though under Article 10 of the Human Rights Act, I have the right to say whatever the fuck I please, as long as it doesn't incite violence or terrorism. But they forgot all about that, I suppose, when it came down to Lucy Connolly, although devil's advocate saying burn the lot of them, I don't care, isn't exactly the smartest thing to say. But I digress. Should she have been arrested? Probably not. But back to the Liverpool incident. As I said, there is no way that you can call this anything other than a terrorist attack. But what I think scares me more than anything is how quick the media were in saying that this was a white British man. Because let's face it, they don't do this for anyone else, do they? Like, if it's anything other than a white British person, they are so reluctant to actually publish those details because they know full well how we'd react, I suspect. And it would further prove the point that we are actually hitting the nail on the head. And at this point, I may as well be the hammer that's nailing it in. What also shocks me more than anything is how blatant this lie is, quite frankly, the next bit I'm about to tell you. And I know some people will say, oh, you should be careful, you don't want to speculate or what have you. I'm not speculating here. If you take a look at any of the footage and any of the pictures that have been showing the Liverpool attack, you'll notice they mentioned a 53-year-old white British man. However, the 53-year-old was the one wrestled to the ground, and during this time, and this is important for context as they do love to leave this out in the mainstream media, there was somebody else already being loaded into the back of that police van in the background, who also was having his head pushed down. I wonder why that is. Could it be to stop us from identifying the person? Or to perhaps figure out some of the characteristics? Begs the question, doesn't it? But it also is a pure coincidence that the same person, wasn't it the guy wearing jeans when he was doing this attack? And what was the driver in? And what colour skin was the driver? He wasn't black, I'll say that much, but he was tanned. He certainly wasn't whiter than a blanched sheet, let me tell you. And he certainly didn't look 53 when he was driving that vehicle. But of course, the mainstream media won't tell you this. You know the drill, folks, because say it with me. Oh, never mind. It doesn't suit the narrative. Beep, 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 beep. Anyway, the point is, the media are trying to willfully omit the details about the guy who was actually driving the car, because it's much easier to use what they know as a partial truth, rather than actually tell us the whole truth. Think about it. That man on the floor, this man who much more appropriately fits the description of the 53-year-old white British man, he was on the floor. I suspect he wanted to get a piece of the wanker who's done this. And I can't say I blame him. I would want a piece of the wanker who tried to butcher 50 fucking people. What you have to understand is there are so many people, not just from what happened in the Southport riots, but what happened in that Liverpool parade. There are so many people that are pissed off right now at what's going on in this country. They're sick and tired of two-tier policing, two-tier justice, two-tier media, and two-tier governing. It's always funny that when it comes down to left-wing people committing violence or riots or what have you, they're very reluctant to say it, and they'll usually say it was a mostly peaceful protest or something like that. But when it comes down to people who are perceived as far right, they will not hesitate to try and smear their name. And we all know that the media has a history, a track record of 50 seconds. Anyway, they have a track record of basically not putting out the full information, especially when it comes down to people who are non-white British. Now let me be clear when I'm saying this. I am not saying fully hand on heart and 100% true that this person is not a white British person or that they are a Muslim, because I can't tell that. I don't know that. What I will say, however, is there are people who are white who convert to Islam, and British encompasses a whole load of nationalities and a whole load of characteristics. I think we should start using the term white English for people who are born and bred here in the United Kingdom, because at least then the foreign nationals can't then use that to be like, oh, I'm white British as well, or I'm black British, or whatever. No. We need to start having more robust systems in place for that. But back to the story. As far as this attack is concerned, I don't know whether he is from the religion of peace. I don't know if he was just a moronic right-winger or what have you. But what I do know is he certainly doesn't look 30, and he certainly doesn't fit the... Well, sorry, he doesn't look like he's 53, sorry, my apologies. But he certainly doesn't look like how they've described them as. And the mainstream media, as I've said, have a track record of lying to us. And I would remind the mainstream media that they are not allowed to lie like that. Because under Section 2 of the 2006 Fraud Act, that would come under fraud by false representation. So if you're going out of your way to say that they're white British, and then it turns out, let's say for the sakes of argument, he ends up being a tanned person from fucking, I don't know, the United Arab Emirates, that would actually come under fraud by false representation, and they could be done. Just like that. So our mainstream media would do very well to remember that. And as for the counter-terrorism police, the fact that you have the nerve to say that this is not a terrorist attack really just shows how soft and spineless you've really become, quite frankly. I mean, if we're going off their standards, what does it take then to have a terrorist attack? Does it take hundreds of people being killed? Does it involve bombs going off and blowing up a chunk of a big city? Like, what is their definition of a terrorist attack? For me, the definition of a terrorist attack is one where someone goes out of their way to attack a certain area, a certain location, which has a lot of children, a lot of women, and is meant to instill fear in the hearts of the people there. That, to me, is a terrorist attack. But what would I know with my 34 years of experience in the world called Earth? Like, if people found out that this is how their free trial of life was going to work, I think a lot of them would not be here right now. But the point I'm trying to make as far as this story is concerned is I wouldn't trust anything the mainstream media says. I wouldn't trust anything that I say either. Not until we have the full picture in the spotlight, as it were. Until it could be proven beyond and to the inclusion of every reasonable doubt what this subhuman is, I think, aside from what we've seen from the clips and the footage and the context around it, I don't think we should go too far down the rabbit hole, because we know what Keir the traitor Starmer likes to do for those who put disinformation out there or misinformation out there, even if it's not in bad faith. Even though that wanker has put out so much disinformation, and the mainstream media have put out even more. We've already seen what they've done to people who were against immigration as far as the Southport riots is concerned. We've already seen what Keir the traitor Starmer does to people who are recording the events of the Southport riots. So it stands to reason why people ought to be very careful, because even if you're loyal to the United Kingdom, you're not doing anybody any good if you end up in jail. So this obviously also applies to me too. But as far as the whole event in general, I'm going to tell the mainstream media and the police right now, the omission of the truth is a very dangerous thing. Very dangerous. Do you want to know what sparked these riots to intensify back in August 2024? The lack of the truth. Would it have stopped the Southport riots? No. Would it have stopped the Southport riots escalating? Absolutely. Think about it. If the media and the police were truthful and Keir the traitor Starmer wasn't covering up Axel Radaku Banana, while it may not have stopped the Southport riots, it would have stopped it from getting any worse. Think of it like an open fire, and instead of what Keir the traitor Starmer did, which was to effectively pour gasoline on the fire, instead it would be like taking a fire blanket and smothering the flames, quite frankly. It wouldn't stop any damage already done, but it would stop it from doing any further damage. And I know people will say 20/20 vision for hindsight and what have you, but that is the truth. They had every bit of power to prevent this from escalating, and they didn't. And right now, we could face another Southport, because the media and the police right now are not telling us the full truth. And I am so bold enough to fucking say that, quite frankly, because as I've said before, and you can say it with me, I'm not going to sugarcoat a motherfucking thing. I am not going to mince my words. I'm going to say it exactly how it is, and I will do my best not to bullshit you, especially now I'm on the partner program, which is something nice. Of course, the vast majority of my videos have about as much chance of being monetized as I have of flying to the moon in a rocket. But it doesn't change the fact that I will keep delivering the truth, or I will do my best to, and I will effectively do it in a way that is absolutely no punches pulled and absolutely no nonsense, with maybe a few jokes thrown in on the way and a few little witty remarks, because obviously I've got to have some semblance of uniquity, if you will, if that's even a word, to make me stand out. Who said you're so big no one can miss you? Shut up, you. No. But jokes aside, the point I'm trying to make is I am not afraid to say things that the lamestream media and our two-tier policing society are unwilling to say. I've got the balls, whether up here or down there, or in my case both, to be able to go out on a limb and say, you know what, this is how it is, not how the mainstream media are trying to portray it. I'm not trying to make myself out like I'm king shit of Turd Mountain by any stretch of the imagination, but what I will say is that if I can clearly see something is a terrorist attack, I am going to label it as such. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, it was an attack and it was done by an individual, it might not have been motivated by this, that, and the... No, I'm just going to say it. It's a terrorist attack. It's as simple as that. Because as I said earlier in this video, do you know any attack on women and children that was not meant to terrify people, that was not meant to instill fear in the people of this country? Because I don't see any time where people being targeted, women and children being targeted, was not seen as a terrorist act. But I suppose if I'm ever in doubt, I'm sure I can ask Sadiq, the terrorist sympathiser Khan, what it's like to live in London, and I'm sure he'll say that terrorism is part and parcel of living in a big city. Now, I haven't really shown a lot of empathy in this video, have I? So let me start with this. I know it's 17 minutes in, I probably should have done it at the start of the fucking video, but at least I'm going to do it here and now. And that is, my heart does go out for all the families who have been severely affected by this terrible, terrible tragedy. It is a shame that our media do not seem to have your backs. It is a shame that our two-tier police would rather throw you to the wolves and say this was not terrorist related. It is a shame that they would say, oh, diversity is our strength, when this is a clear example that it is our biggest weakness. I do feel for all the people who have been harmed in this, and I hope none of them end up losing their free trial of life. My heart goes out to every single one of you, and what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. We, the English people, will be stronger together. We will always have you in our minds and our hearts as we go forward. As I said, I am not afraid to say things that other people may not have the courage to say. I am not afraid to put myself in the line of fire. I thought they called that a flamethrower. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not afraid to put myself in the line of fire, because at the end of the day, someone's got to do it, and someone's got to say it how it is. Thank you. I'm not coming to any assumptions until I know the whole story. But what I do know is what I've mentioned in this video. That there was a man who was on the floor who's in his 50s, who fits the description of white British man, 53 years old. That I do know. There's also footage that clearly shows another man who wasn't this guy, who was driving the fucking car. I also know that there are media clips, media pictures that will portray what the mainstream media have said. Effectively, it'll call them out for being liars. That's the way I look at it, and therefore we should be taking everything the mainstream media says with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, as I've said, they have a track record of lying to the British people. They have a habit of not telling us the truth. If they were willing to lie about Southport, then there is no reason why we shouldn't suspect that they'll lie about this. As I said, I'm not going to say for a fact that it is a certain religion doing this, Likewise, I'm not going to say it's anyone else doing it for the time being, but what I do know is I don't think it was the 53-year-old who was driving that vehicle, quite frankly. And I hope that 53-year-old is innocent, because if he is innocent and it wasn't him driving the vehicle, he could technically sue the mainstream media as they are damaging his reputation. And I hope he takes me up on that, because you don't exactly want to be known as the person who went and rammed 50 fucking people with a car. I wouldn't even want to be known as that if I was doing it in Grand Theft Auto, let alone in real life. I guess what I'm trying to say is one of the worst ways that you can prevent a riot from taking place, or perish the thought a revolution taking place, is you omit the details. You lie to the public. Now let me be clear. I by no means want a violent revolution. I by no means condone it, or riots. I do not condone breaking the law in any way, shape or form. Much better, I can see now. But what I will say is I completely understand if people get pissed off and they decide they've had enough. Because I can completely understand where they're coming from. Think about it. We've already seen one attack last year on our kids. We've now seen a second attack on kids, albeit less of them. But we have seen these kinds of atrocities during the mid of the year, basically. We've seen an attack, I believe, in Germany. We've seen attacks. Was there one in Brussels at some point? I can't remember off the top of my head. But the point I'm trying to make is there's been lots more terrorist attacks that have been happening over the whole continent of Europe. And a lot of them do seem to be predominantly done by the so-called religion of peace. Now, as I've said, and I cannot stress this enough, it might even be the fourth time I'm saying this now, but I don't think yet the person who's done this atrocity in Liverpool is a Muslim. I can't in good faith say that for 100% certainty, as I do not know the whole context. I do not know if he really is a Muslim behind the wheel. That is why I have actively said I do not know who this person is. But what I will say is that they don't have to be a certain skin colour to be a Muslim. Anyone can be a Muslim, whether they're white, they're black, they're green, they're yellow, they're blue, they're purple or whatever. Although they might question some of those other colours. But I digress. The point I'm trying to make is we have been seeing a lot more of these atrocities taking place in Europe, and they do seem to be predominantly done by the religion of peace. The ones the NPCs in the left wing seem very eager to have flood into our country in their hundreds and thousands. These are the people who, at some point, I think I even shouted it in the crowds when I was over in the national strike. I told them, why don't you take them in then? I told them, you take some in first then. But, of course, we know the leftoids won't, because they're a bunch of paid actors. They're effectively a bunch of hypocrites who they preach one thing and then deliver the exact opposite. A bit like Keir the traitor Starmer, who told us that he was a man of the working class, but he's shown that he is completely against the working class. But I don't want to end this on a too negative a note, because it's very easy to do lots of negative news. But what's really hard is to redress the balance, as it were. To allow one good thing and one bad thing. Or maybe even one good thing and a bunch of several bad things. So that good thing, of course, is that Tommy Robertson has now been released from prison. And he put out a little message out there, basically telling us of how Silenced has done its job. 168 million views. And it was all planned by Tommy. I suspect that he could have played this a bit better, to be devil's advocate here. Think about it. If the Americans were the ones who released the silence documentary first, then surely Tommy Robinson should never have pled guilty to contempt of court in the first place, as he technically already had that film out in the public domain. Therefore, can it really be classed as contempt of court? But as we all know, rules for thee, but not for me. That's how our two-tier society likes to work. And again, the mainstream media are not going to want to tell you that. But it does seem suspicious, doesn't it? How Tommy Robinson was sent to jail for this. Anybody with even the slightest flicker of common sense would have been able to see, well, the Americans have already put this out in the public domain, so surely Tommy Robinson couldn't be done in for the same thing. But no, that's not how it works with Keir, the traitor, Starmer. But it all ended up working out in the end, didn't it? 168 million views, as I said. Tommy Robinson, okay, he suffered a little bit. He's grown a beard, and frankly, he's never looked better. But jokes aside, he is ready to fight on, it looks like. Unfortunately, he is going to be in court again on the 5th of June because of the Daily Mail reporters, or maybe I was right first time, who effectively wanted to sit there and say, Tommy Robinson put me in fear of violence. No, he did not put you in fear of violence. The only thing you could say about Tommy Robinson with what he did was he said, I could come up to your house and dox you and what have you. I could come up to your house and put your name on blast and what have you. And I could have a chat with you about all this stuff and the defamation, what have you. Tommy has never gone out of his way to bring in people who are not involved with other people's politics. These two reporters who have conveniently decided not to have their names revealed because obviously they're in fear of their lives, even though Tommy has never actually threatened violence. These two shills, they put that little argument in, as I said before. They put it in recently when this whole thing took place last year in August, coincidentally in the Southport riot scenario. But they want to say, oh, I'm in fear. And as I've said, I think the limit is 6 months if they want to go with criminal harassment for Tommy Robinson. If this is what it is and they are trying to get him for criminal harassment, this case can be thrown out. Just like that. But I suspect what's going to happen is they are going to try to bring in other charges and they're basically going to try and nail him to a wall, effectively, with these new charges. Because how else are they going to lock him up otherwise? Then there's also the factor of he didn't give the counter-terrorism unit his passkey to his phone, which, if he hasn't faced trial for that already, he will at some point, because obviously that is against the law. But I do agree with what he did, effectively, because if he broke the law if he didn't break the law as far as giving them the passkey is concerned, he would have ended up breaking the law as far as confidentiality is concerned at the Data Protection Act, or the GDPR. But again, that's something the mainstream media are not going to want to tell you, quite frankly. But at least he's free. There is apparently going to be a demonstration in September. But I am worried for the way this country is boiling over. I really am. As I said, I don't want a violent revolution, and I would never condone it. But look at how willing they are to lie through their teeth, to libelously slander the British public. Look at how they are doing everything they can to protect the identities of the usual suspects. Now, that's not for me saying that the person who's done this recent attack is part of the usual suspects, as I've said. But what I am saying is that they seem to be being a little bit too vague with their descriptions. And from what we saw from the person who was driving the vehicle, he certainly doesn't look like he's 53 years old. That I can definitely dispute. 100%. I can't dispute what type of person he is, but I can dispute the fucking age, and I will. Because that man does not look like fucking 53 years old. And I say man loosely. As I said, anybody that goes out of their way to plow a car through women and children, as well as people just celebrating their their football club's victory, I'm sorry, you're scum. Period. And nothing is going to change my opinion on that. The bottom line is, the police and the media need to be much more open than what they have been. And Keir the traitor Starmer also needs to start being more open, though we've got about as much chance of that as I have of winning the next decathlon, quite frankly. But they need to start being more open with us, or it is going to end up leading to potentially more riots. And then when that happens, they won't be able to blame the far right like they keep doing. They won't be able to blame the Tories. They won't be able to blame anyone else other than themselves. That's the cold, bitter truth. And if they dare to try and say that it was any of them, we can take a look back at what happened in Southport and say, no, you should have learned your lesson from what happened in Southport. Like I said, I do not condone what happened in those Southport riots, but I do understand why it happened, because people were quite rightly pissed off that their kids were being targeted and killed. That is why the riots happened. It didn't happen because of far-right links like Keir the traitor Starmer tried to say. It happened because ordinary people were fed up of inaction against the illegal immigrants and the constant attacks on our women and children. That's why they're angry. That's why I suspect a lot of Scousers are currently angry right now. And I would not be surprised if there was another riot to break out in Liverpool, quite frankly. Because the way I look at it, we've been lied to for too long. We have been omitted from the truth for too long. And the way I look at it, all that will happen is if you omit the truth from the people, you are going to stoke the flames of anger. You will be pouring gasoline on an open fire. You cannot be surprised if your mentality of better in than out ends up getting people seriously hurt and killed on the back of your inability to swallow your pride and tell us the fucking truth. That is the thing when you play with fire. If you try to play with fire, there is no doubt, sooner or later, you're going to get burned.